Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into something that absolutely fascinates me. What actually happens to a racing pigeon when it flies 500 kilometers back home? Now, if you're new to pigeon racing, 500k might sound absolutely insane. That's like flying from London to Edinburgh, or from New York to Detroit. But for a well-trained racing pigeon, this is serious competition territory. I've been racing pigeons for over 20 years now, and I've seen thousands of birds take on these marathon flights. Every single time, I'm amazed by what these incredible athletes can do. But here's the thing, most people have no idea what's really happening up there when your bird disappears into the sky at 6 in the morning. So today, I want to take you through the entire journey. We're going to talk about how you prepare a bird for this kind of distance, what happens on race day, how weather can make or break everything, and what's actually going on in that pigeon's body and mind as it navigates hundreds of kilometers back home. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have a whole new respect for these amazing birds. The months before, training and preparation. Let's start at the beginning, because a 500k race doesn't just happen. The preparation starts months, sometimes even a year before race day. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that proper preparation is absolutely everything. First thing you need to understand is that racing pigeons are athletes. Just like you wouldn't expect someone to run a marathon without training, you can't just grab any pigeon and expect it to fly 500 kilometers. These birds need to build up their endurance, their navigation skills, and their mental toughness gradually. The training schedule usually starts with short tosses, maybe 5 or 10 kilometers from home. We call these training tosses, and they're crucial for several reasons. First, they help the young birds learn the local landmarks around your loft. They start to memorize the roads, the rivers, the hills, all the visual cues they'll use later for navigation. Second, they're building up their flight muscles. A pigeon's breast muscle can make up about 20% of its total body weight when it's in peak condition. That's incredible when you think about it. As the weeks go by, we gradually increase the distance. 20k, then 50k, then 100k. Each step teaches the bird something new. At 20k, they're still relying heavily on familiar landmarks. By 50k, they're starting to use their magnetic compass more. And by 100k, they're really developing that incredible homing instinct that makes pigeon racing possible. Now, feeding is absolutely critical during this training period. A racing pigeon burns an enormous amount of energy. We're talking about a bird that weighs maybe 400 grams flying for 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours straight. The diet has to be perfect. During heavy training, I'm feeding a mix that's about 15 to 18% protein with plenty of carbohydrates for quick energy. Beans, peas, corn, wheat, each ingredient serves a purpose. But here's something a lot of beginners don't realize. It's not just about the physical training. These birds need mental preparation too. A 500k race is stressful. The bird gets put in a basket with hundreds of other pigeons, transported for hours in a truck, then released in a place it's never been before. If a bird isn't mentally tough, it can panic, make poor decisions, or even just give up and land somewhere to rest for days. The condition of the bird is everything. When I say condition, I'm talking about the perfect balance of fitness, health, and mental readiness. A bird in perfect condition feels light in your hands, but has solid muscle tone. Its eyes are bright and alert. Its feathers are tight and perfectly groomed. It's eager to fly, but not stressed or anxious. This is where experience really matters. I can look at one of my birds and know whether it's ready for a 500k race or if it needs another few weeks of preparation. The newer fanciers sometimes rush this process, and their birds pay the price. Race day morning, the basket and transportation. All right, let's talk about race day. This usually starts very early. I'm talking 4 or 5 a.m. early. The birds need to be basketed and transported to the release point, which for a 500k race might be an 8 to 10 hour drive from your home loft. Now, basketing might sound simple, but it's actually quite stressful for the birds. Imagine being used to flying free whenever you want, and suddenly you're confined in a small space with dozens or hundreds of other pigeons you don't know. The stress hormone cortisol starts pumping through their system immediately. This is why proper basket training is so important during preparation. Good racers get their birds used to baskets weeks before the actual race. They'll basket them for short periods, sometimes even overnight, so the bird learns that being in a basket doesn't mean danger. During transportation, several things are happening to your pigeon. First, they're dealing with the motion of the truck. Most birds adapt to this pretty quickly, but some get what we might call motion sickness. They'll be less active, maybe not eat or drink as much. This is one reason why the condition I mentioned earlier is so crucial. A bird that's not in perfect health going into basketing might not handle the stress well. The truck journey is also when the bird starts to realize it's getting further and further from home. Now, we don't fully understand how pigeons perceive distance, but there's good evidence they can sense magnetic field changes and infrasound, very low-frequency sound waves that travel for hundreds of kilometers. As the truck moves away from home, the bird is probably picking up on these environmental changes. Temperature control in the transport truck is absolutely critical. Too hot, and the birds become dehydrated and stressed before they even start flying. Too cold, and they burn energy just trying to stay warm. Professional race organizations have strict guidelines about ventilation and temperature monitoring during transport. Most birds don't eat much during transport, which is actually normal. They're stressed, and their digestive system slows down when they're anxious. This is why it's so important that they've been feeding well for weeks before the race. They need those energy reserves built up in their muscles and liver. The release, orientation, and early flight. Now we get to the moment everyone's waiting for, the release. This typically happens early in the morning, often around 6 or 7 a.m. The timing is crucial because it gives the birds the maximum amount of daylight for their journey home. When that basket opens and hundreds of pigeons suddenly explode into the sky, it's an incredible sight. But what's happening in those first few minutes is absolutely critical to the success of the entire race. The first thing the birds do is what we call circling up. They don't just head straight home, they gain altitude and fly in large circles above the release point. This serves several purposes. First, they're getting their bearings. After hours in a dark, moving truck, they need to reorient themselves to the sun, the landscape, and the magnetic field. During this circling phase, you can actually see the birds making decisions. Some will break away from the main group early, confident in their chosen direction. Others will follow larger groups, essentially using the collective wisdom of the flock. And some will circle for 10, 15, even 20 minutes before committing to a direction. This is where individual personality really shows. Some birds are natural leaders. They figure out the correct bearing quickly and head home with confidence. Others are followers. They're more successful when they can join up with other birds heading in the right direction. And some are what we call steady birds. They take their time, circle until they're absolutely sure, then fly a very consistent line home. The altitude they choose for the main flight is fascinating too. Most birds will climb to somewhere between 500 and 2,000 feet above ground level. This gives them a good view of the landscape for navigation, but it's not so high that they're fighting strong upper-level winds. However, this can change dramatically based on weather conditions, which we'll talk about in a minute. In those first 30 minutes after release, the birds are using every navigation tool they have. They're checking the sun's position and calculating how to compensate for its movement across the sky. They're sensing the Earth's magnetic field with specialized cells in their beaks. They're looking for familiar landmarks, even though they're hundreds of kilometers from home. And they're probably picking up on infrasound and smell cues that we're only just beginning to understand. Weather, the great variable. Let me tell you something, weather can make or break a 500K race. I've seen perfect birds with months of preparation get completely thrown off by unexpected weather conditions. And I've seen average birds have the race of their lives because the weather was exactly right for them. Wind is probably the biggest factor. A strong tailwind can turn a 500K race into a speed fest, with birds arriving hours earlier than expected. I've seen races where birds that normally fly at 60 kilometers per hour suddenly average 90 or even 100 kilometers per hour because they caught a perfect tailwind. But headwinds are the real challenge. A strong headwind doesn't just slow the birds down, it forces them to work much harder, burning through their energy reserves much faster. In a severe headwind, birds might have to make strategic decisions about whether to push through or find shelter and wait for conditions to improve. Crosswinds present a different challenge. The birds can compensate for steady crosswinds pretty well. They'll adjust their heading to account for the drift. But gusty, variable crosswinds can be really disorienting. I've seen birds get pushed miles off course by sudden wind shifts, and then they have to spend time and energy getting back on track. Rain is another major factor. Light rain doesn't usually stop a racing pigeon, but heavy rain can be dangerous. Wet feathers lose their insulation properties, so the bird gets cold and has to burn more energy staying warm. Wet feathers are also heavier and less aerodynamically efficient. In really severe storms, smart birds will actually land and wait it out rather than try to push through. Heat is something a lot of people don't think about, but it's huge, especially in summer races. A pigeon's normal body temperature is around 40 to 42 degrees Celsius. That's already pretty hot. When they're flying hard in hot weather, they can overheat quickly. Unlike mammals, birds don't sweat, so they have to cool themselves by panting and by radiating heat through their feet and the unfeathered parts of their heads. I've seen races where the temperature hit 35 degrees Celsius, and birds that were flying strong suddenly started landing to rest in whatever shade they could find. Heat exhaustion is a real risk, and experienced birds learn to recognize their limits. Thermal activity, those rising columns of warm air, can be either helpful or challenging. Smart birds can use thermals to gain altitude with minimal energy expenditure, essentially getting a free ride up. But strong thermal activity also means turbulence, and fighting turbulence burns energy fast. Visibility is crucial too. Fog, heavy rain, or even smoke from fires can make navigation much more difficult. Birds rely heavily on visual landmarks, especially in the final 50 kilometers of their journey home. When visibility is poor, they have to rely more on their magnetic compass and other navigation tools, which can slow them down and increase the chance of getting off course. The physical challenge: what's happening inside? Now, let's talk about what's actually happening inside your pigeon's body during this incredible athletic performance. Because make no mistake, a 500K race is one of the most demanding endurance challenges in the animal kingdom. First, let's talk about energy. A racing pigeon burns through an enormous amount of fuel during a long race. They're primarily burning fat, which makes sense because fat provides more than twice the energy per gram compared to carbohydrates. But they also need readily available carbohydrates for quick energy, especially during the intense early part of the flight, and for any sprinting they need to do. The bird's metabolism shifts into what we might call ultra-endurance mode. Their heart rate during flight can reach 400 to 500 beats per minute. Compare that to a human marathon runner whose heart rate might be 150 to 180. The bird's breathing rate increases dramatically too, and they're processing oxygen incredibly efficiently. Their liver plays a huge role in this process. It's constantly converting stored glycogen into glucose for immediate energy, and it's also processing the byproducts of fat metabolism. A racing pigeon's liver can actually increase in size during the racing season as it adapts to these energy demands. Hydration becomes critical as the hours go by. Birds lose water through their respiratory system. All that panting and heavy breathing causes water loss. They also lose some water through their skin, though much less than mammals do. On a hot day, dehydration can become a serious problem within just a few hours of hard flying. The bird's muscles are working at an incredible level. Those powerful breast muscles are contracting and relaxing 8 to 10 times per second throughout the entire flight. The cellular machinery inside those muscles, the mitochondria, are working overtime to produce the energy needed for each wing beat. Well-conditioned racing pigeons have much higher concentrations of mitochondria in their flight muscles compared to regular pigeons. Heat production becomes a real challenge. All that muscle work produces heat, and the bird has to dissipate it somehow. They do this primarily through their respiratory system and through heat radiation from their feet and unfeathered areas. This is why you'll sometimes see racing pigeons flying with their feet extended on hot days. They're using them as heat radiators. The cardiovascular system is working at maximum capacity. The heart is pumping blood not just to the working muscles, but also to the brain, which needs a constant supply of glucose for navigation, to the liver for energy processing, and to the skin and respiratory system for cooling. Navigation, the incredible journey home. The navigation abilities of racing pigeons are honestly still not completely understood by science, and that's what makes them so fascinating. We know they use multiple systems working together, kind of like having GPS, a compass, a map, and a guidebook all at the same time. The sun compass is probably their primary navigation tool during the day. Pigeons can sense the sun's position even through light cloud cover, and they have an internal clock that lets them compensate for the sun's movement across the sky. It's like having a built-in sundial that automatically adjusts for the time of day. Young birds learn this system by taking note of the sun's position relative to familiar landmarks during their training flights. The magnetic compass is their backup system, and it's absolutely crucial on overcast days when the sun is invisible. Pigeons have magnetite crystals in their beaks and possibly in other parts of their bodies that act like tiny compass needles. They can literally feel the Earth's magnetic field and use it for direction. This is why magnetic storms caused by solar activity can sometimes disrupt pigeon races. It's like scrambling their compass. Visual landmarks become increasingly important as they get closer to home. In the final 50 to 100 kilometers, birds are flying from landmark to landmark, following rivers, roads, railways, mountain ridges. They build up a mental map of these features during training, and experienced birds can navigate this final section incredibly accurately. Smell is a navigation tool that we're only recently beginning to understand. Pigeons have an excellent sense of smell, and there's growing evidence that they can actually smell their way home across hundreds of kilometers. Different areas have different scent signatures: industrial areas, agricultural regions, forests, cities, and birds might be following these scent gradients like a trail leading home. Infrasound navigation is perhaps the most mysterious. Infrasound consists of very low-frequency sound waves that can travel for hundreds of kilometers. Ocean waves, mountain winds, even highway traffic create distinctive infrasound signatures. Some researchers believe pigeons can hear and navigate by these sounds, essentially using the acoustic landscape as a navigation aid. What's really remarkable is how birds integrate all these different navigation systems. If one system fails or gives conflicting information, they can rely on the others. I've seen birds successfully navigate home on completely overcast days when neither sun nor visual landmarks were available. They were probably relying primarily on magnetic and olfactory cues. The decision-making process during navigation is complex too. Birds are constantly evaluating their options. Should they follow that river valley, even though it curves away from the direct line home? Should they climb higher to get better view, or stay low to avoid headwinds? Should they join up with other birds they see, or stick to their own chosen route? Experienced birds develop what we call route knowledge. After flying the same general area multiple times, they learn the best paths. They know which valleys provide shelter from prevailing winds, which ridges offer good thermals for gaining altitude, which landmarks are reliable in different weather conditions. Mental challenges and stress management. People often focus on the physical challenges of long-distance racing, but the mental side is equally important. A 500K race is mentally exhausting for a pigeon, and how they handle that stress can determine whether they make it home successfully. The initial stress from basketing and transport doesn't just disappear when they're released. Some birds carry that stress into their flight, making poor navigation decisions or flying erratically in the early stages. Birds that handle stress will tend to settle into a steady, efficient flight pattern more quickly. Decision fatigue is a real phenomenon. After hours of constantly making navigation decisions, which direction at each landmark, what altitude to maintain, whether to join other birds or fly alone, the bird's decision-making ability can deteriorate. This is why you sometimes see birds make obvious navigation errors in the final stages of a long race, even when they're close to familiar territory. Motivation is crucial and varies dramatically between individual birds. Some birds have an incredibly strong homing instinct. They seem desperate to get home and will push through almost any conditions. Others are more easily discouraged. If they hit bad weather, strong headwinds, or just start feeling tired, they're more likely to land and rest, sometimes for hours or even days. The social aspect affects their mental state too. Some birds fly better alone. They're self-reliant and don't get distracted by other birds. Others perform better when they can team up with other pigeons, sharing the mental burden of navigation, and perhaps feeling more confident in a group. Fear and panic can derail a race completely. A bird that encounters a hawk, gets caught in severe turbulence, or becomes completely disoriented might panic and make very poor decisions. They might fly in the wrong direction for hours, or land in unfamiliar territory, and be too stressed to make good decisions about when to continue. Territory awareness becomes important in the final stages. As birds get closer to home, they're entering areas where there might be resident wild pigeons or other racing pigeons. Some birds become territorial and will chase or harass racing pigeons passing through their area. This can cause delays and additional stress. The drive to return to their mate and nest site is often what keeps birds motivated through the most challenging parts of the race. Racing pigeons are typically bred when they're in peak condition, and that drive to return to eggs or young birds is incredibly powerful. Energy management over distance. Energy management during a 500K race is like fuel economy in a car race. It can make the difference between winning and not finishing at all. Smart birds learn to pace themselves, while inexperienced birds sometimes burn through their energy reserves too quickly and struggle in the final stages. The initial burst after release burns a lot of energy as birds climb to altitude and establish their bearing. Experienced birds get through this phase efficiently, while nervous or excited birds might waste energy with erratic flying or excessive climbing. Efficient flight technique becomes crucial over such a long distance. Birds with smooth, steady wing beats use much less energy than birds that fly erratically. The angle of attack, the timing of wing beats, even small details like how they hold their feet during flight can affect energy consumption over hundreds of kilometers. Altitude management is a constant energy decision. Flying higher often means stronger and steadier winds, but it costs energy to climb. Flying lower might mean calmer air, but also more obstacles to navigate around. Smart birds are constantly evaluating these trade-offs. The use of thermals and updrafts can significantly extend a bird's range. A bird that's skilled at finding and using thermals can essentially get free altitude, saving the energy they would have spent climbing under power. On good thermal days, I've seen birds gain hundreds of meters of altitude while barely flapping their wings. Rest stops are sometimes necessary, especially in challenging conditions. A bird that recognizes it's running low on energy and makes a strategic stop to rest and refuel can actually finish faster than a bird that tries to push through and ends up flying slower and slower as it becomes exhausted. Fat reserves are the primary fuel for long races. A bird in good condition might carry 15 to 20% of its body weight as fat reserves. That sounds like a lot, but during a hard 500K race, they might burn through 60 to 80% of those reserves. This is why condition going into the race is so critical. The bird's ability to process and utilize different energy sources changes throughout the race. Early on, they might rely more on readily available carbohydrates. As the race progresses, fat metabolism becomes increasingly important. In the final stages, if they're running low on reserves, they might even start breaking down muscle protein for energy, which is obviously not ideal. Technology and what GPS tracking teaches us. Modern GPS tracking has revolutionized our understanding of what actually happens during pigeon races. When I started racing 20 years ago, we could only guess at what birds were doing between release and arrival. Now we can track them minute by minute, and some of the discoveries have been absolutely fascinating. Flight paths are rarely straight lines. Even in perfect conditions, birds might deviate from the direct route to take advantage of favorable winds, avoid obstacles, or follow familiar landmarks. Some birds fly remarkably direct routes, while others take scenic detours that might add 50 or even 100 kilometers to their journey. Speed variations throughout the race tell an incredible story. Most birds start fast, settle into a cruising speed for the middle portion, and then either speed up for a strong finish or slow down if they're running out of energy. The GPS data shows that birds often make strategic speed decisions based on conditions they encounter. Rest stops show up clearly in GPS data, and they're more common than many people realize. Even in moderate conditions, it's not unusual for birds to make brief stops, sometimes just 5 to 10 minutes to drink water or get out of a headwind. In challenging conditions, stops might last hours. Route sharing is fascinating to observe. Multiple birds will sometimes follow very similar routes, even though they were released at different times or from different baskets. This suggests they're all responding to the same environmental cues, wind patterns, landmark visibility, or other factors we might not even be aware of. Altitude profiles from GPS show how birds adapt to conditions throughout the race. They might start at 1,000 feet, climb to 3,000 feet to get above turbulence, then descend to 500 feet when approaching familiar territory. These altitude changes represent strategic decisions about energy management and navigation efficiency. Weather correlation with GPS data has taught us so much about how birds respond to changing conditions. We can see exactly when a bird encounters a headwind, speed drops, altitude might change, when they find a thermal, rapid altitude gain with little forward progress, or when they decide conditions are too severe and land to wait it out. Individual bird personalities show up clearly in tracking data. Some birds are aggressive. They maintain high speeds even in challenging conditions. Others are conservative. They slow down or stop at the first sign of difficulty. Some are steady. They maintain very consistent speeds throughout the entire race. The data also reveals how experience affects performance. Veteran birds often take more efficient routes, make fewer navigation errors, and manage their energy better throughout the race. Their GPS tracks tend to be smoother and more purposeful compared to young birds. Arrival and recovery. The final approach and landing is often the most exciting part of the race for us fanciers. After hours of wondering and worrying, seeing your bird appear on the horizon is an incredible feeling. But for the bird, this final phase presents its own challenges and behaviors. The final 10 to 20 kilometers, birds are usually flying in very familiar territory. Their speed often picks up because they know exactly where they are and can see home. But they're also often running low on energy reserves at this point, so it's a balance between excitement and exhaustion. The approach to the loft varies dramatically between individual birds. Some come in high and fast, circling the loft several times before landing. Others approach low and direct, landing immediately. A few will actually fly past the loft, circle the area, and then come back, possibly double-checking that they're really home. Landing behavior tells you a lot about the bird's condition. A bird in good shape will land confidently and immediately start drinking and eating. A bird that's exhausted might land heavily, sit quietly for several minutes before moving, or even just stand there looking dazed. The immediate recovery period is critical. Most birds will drink first. They're usually quite dehydrated after hours of flight. Then they'll typically eat, often consuming much more food than they would normally. Their body is desperately trying to replenish the energy reserves that have been depleted during the race. Checking the bird's condition upon arrival is something every responsible fancier does. You're looking at their breathing rate, how they're standing, the condition of their feathers, any signs of injury or distress. A bird that's been pushed to its absolute limits might need special care to recover properly. The psychological state of returning birds is interesting too. Some seem almost euphoric. They're alert, active, and seem proud of their accomplishment. Others appear subdued or even stressed, perhaps overwhelmed by the effort they've just completed. Most settle back into normal behavior within a few hours. Recovery nutrition is important. While birds will eat heavily immediately after arrival, their digestive system needs to readjust after hours of focusing primarily on flight. I typically offer easily digestible foods and make sure fresh water is always available. The next few days after a 500K race are crucial for recovery. The bird needs to rebuild muscle tissue, replenish fat reserves, and recover mentally from the stress of the race. How well they recover affects their performance in subsequent races and their long-term health. Some birds seem to thrive on the challenge of long races and recover quickly, ready to race again within a week or two. Others find long races more stressful and need more recovery time. Understanding your individual birds and their recovery patterns is part of becoming a successful long-distance racer. Conclusion, key lessons, and proper preparation. After walking you through this incredible journey, I hope you have a new appreciation for what racing pigeons accomplish during a 500K race. It's truly one of the most remarkable athletic performances in the animal kingdom. The biggest lesson here is that success in long-distance racing is all about preparation. You can't shortcut the months of training, the careful attention to diet and condition, the gradual building of distance and experience. Every aspect of preparation matters, from the physical conditioning to the mental toughness to the navigation skills developed through consistent training. Weather awareness is absolutely crucial. Understanding how different conditions affect your birds, knowing when to hold them back from a race because conditions are too severe, and learning to read weather patterns can make the difference between success and disaster. Individual bird management is key. Not every bird is suited for 500K racing. Some excel at shorter, faster races. Others thrive on the ultra-long distances. Learning to match your birds to the right races based on their abilities and personalities is a skill that takes years to develop. The technology available today, GPS tracking, weather forecasting, even simple things like better basket design and transport, gives us tools that earlier generations of pigeon racers never had. But the fundamentals remain the same: healthy, well-trained, properly conditioned birds with strong homing instincts. Recovery and care after racing is just as important as preparation before racing. A bird that's pushed too hard or not cared for properly after a tough race might never perform at its best again. Responsible racing means thinking about the long-term welfare of your birds, not just winning individual races. For those of you just starting in pigeon racing, don't rush into long-distance racing. Start with shorter races, learn your birds, understand their individual needs and abilities. Build your experience gradually, just like you build your bird's racing ability gradually. Remember that pigeon racing is about much more than just speed. It's about navigation, endurance, mental toughness, and the incredible bond between bird and fancier. When you understand everything that goes into a successful 500K race, every bird that makes it home becomes a winner in its own right. The sport of pigeon racing has taught us so much about navigation, endurance physiology, animal behavior, and the incredible capabilities of these remarkable birds. Every race is an opportunity to learn something new, whether you've been racing for 2 years or 20 years. So whether you're thinking about getting into pigeon racing or you're an experienced fancier looking to improve your long-distance results, remember that it all comes back to proper preparation, understanding your birds as individuals, and never losing sight of the incredible athletic achievement that every successful race represents. Thanks for joining me on this detailed journey through a 500K pigeon race. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe for more in-depth content about pigeon racing, and let me know in the comments what aspects of the sport you'd like me to cover next. Until next time, keep those birds flying strong.